This is the Russian president and the Saudi crown prince Mohammed bin Salman at the G20 summit in Buenos Aires earlier today, engaging in what seems to be one part gregarious greeting, one part touchdown celebration. Neither of these two world leaders will be formally meeting with or publicly high-fiving President Trump in Argentina, but both of these strongmen have been accused of having journalists and their political enemies killed. And they all have also both seemingly benefited from how President Trump's business comes first, foreign policy. With me now is Ambassador Nick Burns, who was the U.S. ambassador to NATO during President George W. Bush's administration. Mr. Ambassador, good to see you, sir.
Thanks, Chuck.
Let me start with this issue of, I know everybody's been focused on the Mueller and the Cohen aspect of this, but if you broaden out over the last 10 days, the president's business relationships with two countries in particular, Russia and Saudi Arabia, seem to be perhaps having an impact on American foreign policy. How do we unpack this?
I think we've never seen a situation like this in all of American history. We've never had a president who wasn't transparent, at least in modern times, last century, about his finances, who didn't stop doing business when he ran for president, especially business with the most dangerous adversary the United States has, the Russian Federation. You know, I think we've all been scratching our heads for the last 2 years. President Trump seems incapable of criticizing Vladimir Putin for anything, even when he breaks international law flagrantly as he did last weekend. And now the same is true in Saudi Arabia. There seems to be no penalty for Mohammed bin Salman. There doesn't even seem to be a willingness to take him aside privately and to chastise him for the murder of Khashoggi. So the president looks craven here, frankly. From a foreigner's perspective, it almost looks like he's incapable of having a normal relationship, which would be critical with the Russians and wouldn't always be so happy with the Saudis.
But given the history, or at least recent history, both with the Saudis and with the Russians, who believe diplomacy, the only thing that matters in diplomacy is the color green, right? Money, that they just sort of buy access and buy all these things. At this point, why shouldn't Congress just start to wonder, we've got to understand more of the president's financial connections to these two countries?
Well, I certainly hope that happens when the new Congress sits in January. First of all, we've got to know more about the president's finances when he was in business, trying to do business with Russia. This gets to our basic national security. We haven't had a president in the last 70 years who hasn't stood up to the Russians or the Soviets before them when they were clearly out of line, and this president hasn't done that. And, you know, we've had a relationship with Saudi Arabia since the FDR administration, but it's always been clear who's the senior partner in that relationship. It's been the Americans. Not clear now. And so this does, I think it affects the president much more broadly, Chuck, than just these two relationships. He looks erratic and he looks distracted in Buenos Aires. He sets a meeting with a leader, he cancels it, he puts it back on. He doesn't seem to be able to focus on issues for our country. He doesn't appear to be willing to make the tough message and to tell people some bad news if they are flattering to him. And I think a lot of countries are on to him, and that's not good for the United States.
Is there a perception that America's foreign policy is for sale? I ask this because you've had the president cite Saudi arms deals as the reason not to punish MBS as harshly as others want to for the Khashoggi death. Everything about the NATO relationship he always does within the prism of financial dealings. It is always about, you know, with Russia, it's about doing bigger deals and things like this. Has he sent the message that America's foreign policy is for sale?
Well, I think the problem that the president has, one of the problems, is that he does describe our foreign policy in almost completely contractual terms. You're right about the NATO, the relationship with the European Union and the NATO allies. It's all about their defense spending, about nothing else. And when he made the case to the American people a couple of days ago, whether Mohammed bin Salman committed the murder or whether he didn't, we're still going to go ahead because it's all about money. There was nothing about what's been unique about the United States since our founding. We're a nation of ideas and ideals, and we believe in democracy. And I think, Chuck, if the president had come to the American people and said, what happened here against Khashoggi was a horrific crime, there is going to be a penalty against Saudi Arabia, here it is, but we can't cut off the entire relationship. Right. I think a lot of people would have understood that. They would have understood the need for balance, but the president didn't do that.
How should we, one of my producers brought up the fact, and I want you to, that weird handshake between MBS and Putin, right? And, obviously the first thing that jumps to my mind, that what do they have in common? They both had people killed in the last 6 months, or at least been allegedly accused. Journalists killed in the last 6 months. But as a producer pointed out right before we got on, it's like, I guess MBS doesn't really care that Iran's #1 backer around the world is Vladimir Putin.
Well, I saw it, Chuck, as Putin signaling to MBS, no matter what the U.S. Senate does to you, I'll never judge you. I'll never judge you on what you do. And Putin, I think, and MBS, they've got a relationship on energy and global oil prices. And for MBS, it was his way, that bro handshake, as people are calling it, of signaling to Donald Trump, if your Senate sanctions me over Yemen, I've got alternatives. And so that was signaling on both parts, and a very unfortunate one for the United States. And frankly, the president's fallen into this because he hasn't taken a morally courageous stand on the murder of Jamal Khashoggi.
All right, I got to ask you this question. The decision by the president to cancel the meeting with Putin, what's been interesting here is I've heard arguments made by folks on the right who both say, thank God it's canceled, God only knows what he did, or thank God it's canceled because that's the punishment Putin deserves. Which camp are you in, and actually, is this a missed opportunity?
I'm in the camp, Chuck, that we have to send a really tough message to Russia that they're not going to get away with this, that further sanctions are coming. So if the president was prepared to give that message, I was in favor of the meeting. However, I doubt that the president is constitutionally capable of giving a tough message to Putin. Therefore, I was happy when he, at first, canceled the meeting. I thought that made the statement on Ukraine. It didn't jeopardize the president having another Helsinki moment where he appears submissive and soft. But now the meeting's back on, and we may have the worst of both worlds.
Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Beat the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.